I'm Yolanda, 28 years old, and until last week, my photography career was just a waste of potential, according to my father. When he finally declared, "From now on, you'll cover your own rent," something inside me snapped. That night, I packed my equipment, clothes, and memories into my car and disappeared into the Manhattan darkness. 3 days later, my phone buzzed. "The rent is due. Where are you?" Mom's text felt like an anchor trying to drag me back to a life I no longer wanted. If you're watching this from a place where your dreams have been called pointless, hit that subscribe button. Let me know in the comments where you're from. I'd love to hear your story while I share mine. Photography wasn't just a career choice for me. It was the only path that ever felt right. My journey began when I was 9 years old. My grandfather passed away that summer, leaving behind a weathered Nikon camera that nobody else wanted. While the adults sorted through his valuable possessions, I sat cross-legged on his hardwood floor, turning that camera over in my small hands, fascinated by the mechanical dials and glass eye that had captured so many moments of our family history. Be careful with that. Yolanda, my mother, had cautioned, probably assuming I'd break it within days. But I treated that camera like a sacred artifact. I spent hours in our backyard, photographing ladybugs on leaves, the pattern of sunlight through our maple tree, my little sister Amelia making funny faces. Even then, I saw the world differently through that viewfinder. Everyday scenes transformed into something meaningful, something worth preserving. My father Richard never understood this fascination. As the CEO of Palmer Financial Solutions, he viewed the world through spreadsheets and quarterly reports. Success had a clear definition in our household: prestigious college practical degree, stable career with advancement opportunities. My older brother Jonathan followed this blueprint perfectly. Harvard Law associate position at a top New York firm and now partner track by 32, the golden child. By the time I reached high school, photography had evolved from a hobby into an obsession. I converted our basement storage room into a darkroom, spending my allowance on chemicals and photo paper. While other teenagers hung out at the mall, I volunteered assisting wedding photographers or documenting community events. Each image I captured and developed felt like tangible evidence that I was creating something of value. Senior year arrived with mounting pressure about college applications. Over dinner one evening, Dad announced he'd arranged an interview for me with his friend at Cornell's business program. "I didn't apply to Cornell's business program," I said quietly. "I took care of it," he replied, not looking up from his steak. "Thomas owes me a favor. Your grades aren't spectacular, but with my recommendation, I applied to NYU's Tisch School of the Arts photography program." The silence that followed was deafening. My mother's fork froze halfway to her mouth. Jonathan suddenly became intensely interested in his mashed potatoes. "That's not happening," Dad finally said. His voice was level controlled, which was always more frightening than when he raised it. "We don't spend $30,000 a year for you to take pictures." But I stood my ground. For the first time in my life, I defied him directly. The resulting argument lasted weeks, with ultimatums thrown and tears shed. Eventually, we reached a compromise. I could attend NYU if I double majored in business administration. I agreed, though I never had any intention of pursuing the business degree beyond the minimum requirements. College became my first taste of freedom. I thrived in the photography program, learning technical skills while developing my artistic voice. My professors praised my work, particularly my urban landscape series, capturing overlooked corners of New York neighborhoods. For those 4 years, the business courses were just a tax I paid for pursuing my passion. I scraped by with B-minuses, while pouring my soul into photography projects. After graduation 5 years ago, reality hit hard. While my classmates secured corporate jobs with steady paychecks, I faced the precarious existence of a freelance artist. Wedding photography paid the bills, but left me creatively unfulfilled. Commercial work was competitive and sporadic. My true passion, fine art photography, generated praise, but rarely income. That's when the financial arrangement with my parents began. What started as just until you get established stretched into years of dependency. My father agreed to cover the rent for my small Brooklyn apartment while I built my portfolio and sought gallery representation. Every month the money appeared in my account, and with it the unspoken weight of his disapproval. My apartment became both sanctuary and studio. 600 square feet that represented both freedom and failure. White walls covered with my prints and inspirational images. The living room doubled as workspace, with lighting equipment often set up for days during project phases. The spare bedroom converted to a digital darkroom with my computer and editing setup. It wasn't much, but it was mine. Or so I thought. In those 5 years, I achieved small victories. My work appeared in 3 local gallery shows. I sold 14 prints to private collectors. A minor photography magazine published my photo essay on gentrification in Brooklyn. Each achievement, I proudly shared with my parents, hoping finally to validate my choice. "That's nice," my mother would say, genuine, but not understanding the significance. "How much did they pay you?" my father would ask already, knowing the answer would disappoint him. With each passing year, the financial support became an increasingly painful reminder of what he considered my failure. But I kept pushing forward, believing breakthrough was just around the corner. I just needed a little more time, a little more support, and then I'd show them all that this path was worth taking. I never expected things to collapse so completely, so suddenly. But looking back, the foundation had been crumbling for years. Sunday dinners at my parents' Upper East Side apartment were mandatory family gatherings disguised as casual get-togethers. These weren't just meals, they were performance evaluations. Each week, I'd take the subway from Brooklyn to Manhattan with a knot in my stomach, knowing what awaited me. The dining room in their apartment always felt like a courtroom to me. Crystal chandelier overhead, oriental rug underfoot, antique mahogany table that could seat 12, but typically hosted only 4, my father at one end, mother at the other, Jonathan and me facing each other across the middle. The seating arrangement never varied, just like the conversation. "How's the firm, Jonathan?" Dad would inevitably begin setting the tone for the evening. My brother would launch into tales of his latest legal victory or important client, earning approving nods from our father. My mother would interject with proud questions. I'd sit quietly cutting my food into smaller and smaller pieces, waiting for the spotlight to reluctantly shift my way. "And you, Yolanda? Any actual jobs this week?" The emphasis on actual, never subtle. No matter what progress I reported, a commission, a publication, a gallery interest, it never measured up. My father had mastered the art of dismissive acknowledgement. "That's interesting," he'd say, or "I suppose it keeps you busy," reducing my passionate work to the equivalent of a hobby like knitting or collecting stamps. My mother, Catherine, tried to mediate these exchanges. A respected pediatric surgeon, she'd built her own impressive career while raising 2 children. Unlike my father, she occasionally showed genuine interest in my photography, asking about techniques or subjects. But her support remained tentative, always deferring to my father's stronger opinions when conflict arose. "Your mother and I didn't work this hard so you could struggle," Dad would say, his standard refrain. "We wanted to give you opportunities." "I appreciate those opportunities," I'd counter. "I'm using them to build something meaningful." "Meaningful doesn't pay the rent?" That particular statement became his favorite weapon, wielded with increasing frequency as the years passed. The irony that he was in fact paying my rent made these exchanges all the more humiliating. Jonathan sometimes attempted to deflect attention from me changing the subject to politics or sharing an amusing anecdote from work. But he never directly challenged our father's assessment of my career. Blood loyalty only extended so far in our family. Outside these dinners, the pressure took different forms. My mother's frequent calls often included just checking in questions that were thinly veiled status reports. "Any new opportunities? Have you thought about that graphic design certificate program I mentioned? Susan's daughter makes very good money doing corporate photography." My father's approach was more direct. Emails forwarding job listings at marketing firms. Introductions to connections who might hire me for more commercial work. Articles about the grim financial prospects for arts majors. The consistent message: my choice was a mistake that needed correcting. Last Christmas crystallized everything. The family gathered at my parents' vacation home in Connecticut, Jonathan with his perfect wife Rachel, and their perfect 3-year-old twins. After dinner, we exchanged gifts. Jonathan received a Rolex. I opened my package to find a book, Pivoting Careers Finding Success in Your Second Act. I thought it might give you some ideas, my father said, not unkindly, but with unmistakable intent. You're almost 30, Yolanda. Time to get serious. I smiled and thanked him, but something inside me began to crack that night. The constant undermining of my choices had created hairline fractures in my confidence, my self-image, my determination. Each dismissive comment, each disappointed sigh, each well-intentioned suggestion widened those cracks. Most damaging was how their attitude had seeped into my own thinking. Late at night, staring at my bank account or comparing myself to more successful peers, I'd hear my father's voice in my head. Was he right all along? Am I just wasting my life on a pointless dream? Those moments of doubt became more frequent, more intrusive. The joy I once found in creating images began to dim. I'd look through my viewfinder and worry about marketability instead of artistic merit. Every rejection from a gallery or publication felt like confirmation of his assessment. My friends noticed the change. You don't talk about your projects anymore, my college roommate Ashley observed during our monthly coffee date. You used to light up describing what you were working on. I couldn't explain to her how difficult it had become to believe in myself when the people who raised me clearly didn't. How every dollar of support came with the unspoken price tag of guilt and inadequacy. How exhausting it was to constantly defend a choice that shouldn't need defending. But despite everything, I kept working, kept creating, kept hoping that eventually I'd achieve something so undeniable that even my father would have to acknowledge its worth. Something that would transform. When are you going to get a real job into I was wrong about your photography? That moment seemed to arrive when I received an invitation to participate in a group exhibition at Westside Gallery. Not the most prestigious venue in New York, but legitimate, a small space in Chelsea that had launched several notable careers. The curator had seen my work in a smaller show and thought my Urban Decay series would complement the exhibition theme. This was my chance to prove myself, to my family, and to my own doubting mind. I spent weeks selecting and printing my best images, investing more than I could afford in professional framing. The validation I'd been seeking for years seemed finally within reach. I just needed my family to witness it. The invitation sat on my kitchen counter for 3 days before I worked up the courage to tell my family. Cream-colored cardstock with embossed lettering Westside Gallery presents Urban Perspectives, featuring works by emerging photographers. My name there in print, alongside 7 others. Opening night was scheduled for Friday 7 p.m. Wine and hors d'oeuvres would be served. Professional attire suggested. I called my mother, first catching her between surgeries at the hospital. That sounds wonderful, honey, she said, her voice genuinely warm. I'll put it on the calendar. Your father has that benefit for the children's hospital, but I'm sure I can make it. Hope flickered inside me. Perhaps seeing my work displayed professionally appreciated by others would help her understand. Jonathan was next. I've got a deposition that might run late, but I'll try to swing by afterward, he promised. Rachel's parents are in town, so she'll be entertaining them. My father was the last call, the one I dreaded most. I caught him at his office, his secretary putting me through, after the standard 30-second wait he imposed on all calls, family included. Westside Gallery, he repeated after I explained. Never heard of it. It's small but respected, I said, trying to keep the defensive tone from my voice. Several artists who showed there early in their careers have gone on to major exhibitions. A pause, the soft sound of him tapping his pen against his desk, a habit when he was weighing a decision. Friday is the hospital benefit, he finally said. Your mother and I are expected to attend. Major donors will be there. The opening runs until 10, I countered. Maybe after. Another tap 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 of his pen. These events run long. And frankly, Yolanda, I'm not sure what you expect to accomplish with this. Another line on your resume that doesn't lead anywhere. Another evening of people making polite comments about photographs that won't sell. The familiar sting of his dismissal burned, but I pressed on. This is important to me, Dad. I've been working toward this kind of recognition for years. I'd really like you to see it. We'll see, he said, which I knew meant no. Good luck with your show. I hung up and stared at the invitation again. What had I expected? That one gallery showing would suddenly transform my father into a supportive parent, that he'd walk through the door, see my work on those white walls, and finally understand. Friday arrived. I spent the afternoon at the gallery helping with final arrangements. My 4 pieces were hung in a prime spot near the entrance. Large format urban landscapes, capturing overlooked beauty in decaying infrastructure. Rust and concrete and graffiti transformed through my lens into something poetic, something worthy of attention. The curator, Marisa, complimented the work as we adjusted the lighting. "These have such emotional resonance," she said, standing back to examine the display. "You found humanity in these abandoned spaces. That's not easy to accomplish." Her words bolstered my confidence as opening time approached. I changed into my one good dress in the gallery's tiny bathroom, applied makeup, and took a deep breath. This was my moment. I wouldn't allow my father's absence to diminish it. By 7:30, the gallery was comfortably filled with attendees. Art students, local photographers, a few critics, friends of the other artists. I circulated explaining my work, when asked accepting compliments with genuine gratitude. Every few minutes, my eyes drifted to the door, still hoping. 8 o'clock passed, then 8:30, 9. My phone remained silent. No messages from my mother explaining her delay or apologizing for missing it. No text from Jonathan about his deposition running long. They simply didn't come. Standing alone in a corner, champagne flute in hand, I felt a familiar hollowness expanding in my chest. The same feeling I'd experienced at piano recitals, where other parents beamed with pride, while mine were conspicuously absent. At college exhibitions where classmates introduced professors to supportive families while I made excuses for mine. First show. A man's voice interrupted my thoughts. I turned to find a tall bearded stranger in his early 40s, studying me with kind eyes. With this gallery, yes, I managed straightening my posture and attempting to look professional rather than abandoned. "James Whitaker," he said, extending his hand. "I collect photography, particularly urban landscapes. Your series is exceptional." We spoke for nearly 30 minutes. Unlike the polite, vague compliments from other attendees, James offered specific observations about my compositional choices, use of light thematic elements. He understood what I was trying to achieve with my work, in a way few people ever had. "I'm putting together a book on contemporary urban photography," he explained, as the event began winding down. "Your perspective would add something valuable. Would you be interested in discussing a potential collaboration?" He handed me his business card, James Whitaker, photography curator and publisher, along with an invitation to contact him about the project. For the first time that evening, genuine excitement replaced my disappointment. The gallery sold 2 of my prints that night. Not to James, who said he'd prefer to acquire something after our meeting, but to other attendees who connected with the images. Marisa was delighted, already discussing the possibility of including me in their next group show. By any objective measure, the evening was a success, the kind of opportunity I'd been working toward for years. Yet, driving home to Brooklyn, all I could think about was the empty space where my family should have been. How even this achievement would be diminished in their eyes, reframed as a lucky break rather than the result of persistent effort and genuine talent. I entered my apartment just after 11, dropping my keys in the ceramic bowl by the door, a piece I'd photographed for my still life series last year. The message light on my phone was blinking. My heart jumped. Perhaps my mother had called to apologize, to ask how the opening had gone. "Yolanda, it's Dad." His voice sounded tired, irritated. "The check for next month's rent will be deposited tomorrow. Your mother wants to know if you're coming to dinner on Sunday. Call us back." Not a word about the exhibition. Not a single question about how it went. Just the same monthly reminder of my financial dependence and the expected adherence to family routine. Something shifted inside me then. A recognition that no achievement would ever be enough. That my father would always see my passion as a phase to outgrow a rebellion, to overcome a mistake to correct. I sat on my couch until dawn, surrounded by the photographs he'd never bothered to see, contemplating a decision that had been forming for longer than I realized. Sunday dinner arrived with thunderstorms that matched my mood. Rain pelted the taxi windows as I traveled from Brooklyn to Manhattan rehearsing what I would say. The business card from James Whittaker sat in my purse like a talisman, tangible evidence that someone valued my work enough to invest in it. My father opened the door, scotch in hand, Sunday ritual already in progress. "You're late," he said, by way of greeting, glancing at his watch. "We were about to start without you." The apartment smelled of roast beef and tension. My mother emerged from the kitchen apron, still on, to kiss my damp cheek. "Terrible weather," she murmured, taking my coat. Jonathan called. "He and Rachel are staying in. The twins have colds." Of course they weren't coming. That meant no buffer between me and my father's inevitable interrogation. I followed my parents to the dining room where the table was set for 3 instead of the usual 4. Somehow this minor difference made everything feel more confrontational. Saturday wine was poured. Salads were served. The familiar choreography of family dinner proceeded without deviation until my father cleared his throat. So he began, knife poised over his beef. "How was your little gallery thing?" The dismissive phrasing ignited something in me. "It wasn't a little gallery thing, Dad. It was a juried exhibition at a respected Chelsea gallery. I sold 2 prints. A curator wants to include my work in a photography book. It was actually quite significant for my career." 2 prints, he repeated, as if confirming a disappointing test score. "And what did these sell for?" $600 each. He didn't need to verbalize his calculation. $1,200 for months of work. His raised eyebrow said it all. "The exposure is more valuable than the immediate sales," I explained, hating how defensive I sounded. "This kind of recognition leads to more opportunities." "Recognition doesn't pay rent, Yolanda." There it was again, his favorite refrain. $1,200 doesn't even cover 1 month for that apartment. My mother intervened. "Richard, Yolanda is building her reputation. These things take time." 5 years, he countered. 5 years we've been supporting this hobby. He set down his fork and fixed me with the same look he'd given underperforming employees. "At what point do we acknowledge this isn't working? That it's time to apply your education to something practical?" "My photography is practical," I said, voice steady, despite my racing heart. "It's what I'm good at. It's what I love." "Love doesn't pay bills." He took a sip of wine. "I built my company from nothing because I understood that success requires sacrifice. Sometimes that means putting aside what you love for what's necessary." "Your photography is lovely, honey," my mother added, her perpetual middle ground. "But perhaps you could supplement with something more reliable. There are excellent positions in corporate communications." "Your cousin Stephen." "I don't want to be like cousin Stephen," I interrupted, "or like Dad, or Jonathan. I want to create something meaningful, something that speaks to people." My father's expression hardened. "What your mother and I have provided speaks plenty. The education we paid for, the rent we cover, the safety net that allows you this indulgence." "It's not an indulgence," I said, feeling my composure slipping. "It's my career, my life's work." "Life's work," he scoffed. "You're 28. What do you know about life's work?" I reached into my purse and pulled out James Whittaker's card, sliding it across the table. "This man disagrees. He believes my perspective has value, enough to pay me for it." My father glanced at the card without picking it up. "And how much is this book project paying?" "We're discussing terms tomorrow." "So nothing concrete yet." He pushed the card back toward me. "Another promise of exposure that may or may not materialize." 5 years of suppressed frustration boiled over. Why can't you just be happy for me? Why is everything I accomplish immediately diminished? Do you have any idea how hard I've worked, how much rejection I've faced, how difficult it is to succeed in this field, and despite all of these, that I'm actually doing it? I'm making progress. Why isn't that ever enough for you? The room fell silent except for the rain against the windows. My mother stared at her plate. My father's jaw tightened, the only indication my words had registered at all. "Enough," he finally said, voice dangerously quiet. "I've heard this speech before, about passion and meaning and artistic integrity. Meanwhile, every month, my money pays for your apartment while you chase this fantasy." He set his napkin beside his plate, a gesture of finality. I've been patient. I've been supportive in the only way that actually matters, financially. But there comes a point where support becomes enabling. My stomach tightened, sensing what was coming. From now on, you'll cover your own rent, he pronounced, each word precise and cutting. It's time you experience the real consequence of your choices. Perhaps that will clarify whether this is truly your life's work or just an extended phase of rebellion. Though I'd halfway expected this moment for years, the actuality of it struck like a physical blow. Not because of the financial implications, but because of the absolute certainty in his voice that this would break me. That without his support, my photography career would crumble, proving him right all along. My mother reached across the table for my hand. Richard, perhaps we should discuss this later, when everyone's calmer. There's nothing to discuss, he replied. Yolanda is an adult. She's made her choice. Now she can live with it, like an adult. I looked between them, my father's resolute expression, my mother's conflicted one. In that moment, I saw with perfect clarity the dynamic that had shaped our family for decades, his unyielding certainty, her reluctant acquiescence, my brother's strategic alignment with power, and my own futile resistance, which had only ever been tolerated because it wasn't taken seriously. Okay, I said quietly. My father blinked clearly, expecting argument tears, perhaps even capitulation. My simple acceptance seemed to unsettle him more than any emotional outburst would have. Okay, I repeated, standing up. Thank you for dinner, and for your support until now. Yolanda, don't leave like this, my mother pleaded. Stay, finish dinner. We can talk about alternatives. But I was already moving toward the door, a strange calm settling over me. There's nothing more to discuss. Dad's right. I'm an adult. I've made my choice. Now I'll live with it. I collected my coat and purse while they remained at the table, seemingly paralyzed by my unexpected reaction. At the apartment door, I paused, turning back to meet my father's gaze one last time. You've never believed in me, I said softly. I'm done trying to change that. Then I was gone out into the rain, oddly unburdened, despite the uncertainty ahead. By the time I reached my apartment, I knew exactly what I needed to do. I spent that night packing methodically. Camera equipment first, my livelihood, my voice, then clothes, personal documents, the few mementos I couldn't bear to leave behind. I worked in focused silence, each item carefully considered, each decision deliberate. By morning, my car was loaded. I took one final walk through the apartment that had been both haven and prison. The morning light cast long shadows across the bare walls, where my photographs had hung, 5 years of life reduced to empty hooks and nail holes. I left my keys on the counter with a note: I've moved out. Forward any mail to my email address. As I drove away, I didn't look back at the building. There was nothing there for me anymore except the memory of compromise and the ghost of approval I'd never receive. The first night, in Alex's Williamsburg loft, I barely slept. His couch was comfortable enough, but my mind raced with equal parts panic and exhilaration. I'd done it. Walked away from financial security and family expectations in one decisive moment. Freedom felt both terrifying and intoxicating. You can stay as long as you need, Alex assured me, setting a mug of coffee on the table beside me the next morning. We'd been friends since our first darkroom class at NYU, bound by shared passion and similar family pressures. As a graphic designer who defied his parents' medical dynasty, he understood my situation better than most. I appreciate it, but this is temporary, I replied already, scrolling through apartment listings on my laptop. The numbers made me wince. Brooklyn rents had skyrocketed since my father had begun subsidizing mine. I need to find something affordable fast. What about the meeting with that publisher guy, Whitaker? James had agreed to meet me for coffee that afternoon. I'd emailed him immediately after loading my car, explaining I was relocating and would need to reschedule our discussion. His prompt reply had been a bright spot in the chaos. Looking forward to it. Bring your portfolio, digital, and print if possible. The coffee shop was in Chelsea, a cozy space frequented by creative professionals. I arrived early, setting up my portfolio and tablet at a corner table. When James walked in, his warm smile calmed my frayed nerves. "Life changes?" he asked, noticing the shadows under my eyes as he sat down. "You could say that. Family complications. He nodded understandingly. Been there. Sometimes the hardest part of being an artist is dealing with the people who think they know what's best for you. Over the next hour, James outlined his book project, a collection featuring 10 emerging photographers documenting urban America's transformation. He'd been following my work since seeing pieces in a small Brooklyn exhibition last year, appreciating my ability to find beauty in neglected spaces. Your perspective is unique, he explained, examining prints from my portfolio. There's humanity in how you frame these forgotten places. Not just decay, but dignity. The proposed compensation wasn't life-changing. $3,000 for licensing 8 images plus a percentage of book sales. But it was legitimate work professional recognition, and most importantly, validation from someone who understood the value of what I created. There's something else, James said as our meeting concluded. I curate for Marshall House, a small foundation supporting arts education. We need someone to document our community workshops for an upcoming grant proposal. Paid gig 20 hours over the next month. Interested? I left that meeting with a signed contract for the book, a second project lined up, and something I hadn't felt in years: professional momentum untainted by family judgment. For the first time, my work was being valued on its own merits, not measured against someone else's definition of success. Reality intruded the following day when my phone buzzed with a text from my mother. "The rent is due. Where are you?" I stared at those words, feeling their gravitational pull. The familiar urge to explain, to justify, to seek approval rose within me, then subsided. I put the phone away without responding. 3 more texts followed throughout the day. "Your father is worried. Please let us know you're safe. Call me when you get this." That evening, I finally replied with simple facts: I'm safe. Staying with a friend. I've moved out of the apartment. Her response came immediately. "Come home. We can talk about this." "There's nothing to talk about," I wrote back. Dad made his position clear. I'm making mine clear too. The next week passed in a blur of practical concerns. I found a tiny studio apartment in Bushwick, half the size of my previous place, at 2/3 the cost. The neighborhood was grittier, the building older, but it was within my potential budget if I secured enough work. I signed the lease, using most of my savings for the security deposit and first month's rent. Alex helped me move my minimal belongings from his loft. Standing in the empty studio that first night surrounded by boxes and equipment, I felt equal parts terrified and empowered. What if I can't make this work? I whispered to myself in the darkness. The question hung in the air, unanswered but omnipresent, as I began building my new life. I created a website portfolio, reached out to every contact in my network, applied for exhibitions and grants, pitched to magazines and commercial clients. I took on small projects that previously I might have considered beneath my artistic aspirations: product photography, headshots, event documentation. Sleep became a luxury as I worked around the clock to generate income. My new reality was unforgiving without family support. Every expense required careful consideration. Coffee shops became too expensive. Eating out impossible. New equipment unthinkable. My father's voice echoed in quiet moments. "This isn't working. Time for something practical." Love doesn't pay bills. Each rejection letter or unanswered email seemed to validate his assessment. My phone continued to collect messages from my mother, increasingly concerned, occasionally guilt-inducing. My father remained conspicuously silent. Jonathan called once, his lawyer's mediation skills on full display. "Everyone's upset, Yolanda," he said carefully. "Dad feels disrespected. Mom's worried sick. Maybe it's time to what I interrupted. Admit I was wrong. Beg for forgiveness and financial support. Give up photography for a real job. To communicate," he finished. "This silent treatment isn't productive." Neither was 5 years of being told my passion is worthless. Nobody said worthless. Not in those exact words, no. Just in every implication, every dismissal, every comparison to your practical, profitable career. The conversation ended with neither of us satisfied. I understood then that my brother, for all his professional success, remained trapped in our father's approval system. A prison with golden bars, but a prison nonetheless. 6 weeks after leaving, I hit financial rock bottom. The Marshall House project had concluded. The book advance was spent. 2 commercial clients delayed payment. My checking account held exactly $43.17. I-lank, not enough for next week's rent. That night, sitting on my mattress on the floor, I faced the possibility that my father had been right. That pursuing photography wasn't just difficult, it was impossible without external support. That I'd made a catastrophic mistake walking away from my safety net. In that moment of desperation, I did something I'd never done before. I photographed my own vulnerability. Setting up my camera on a tripod, I captured myself in that sparse room, surrounded by the tools of my craft and little else. The images were raw, unflinching, a visual diary of struggle and determination. I posted 3 of these self-portraits on my website under a new series titled Independence. By morning, I had an email from Marisa at Westside Gallery. These are extraordinary, honest in a way few artists manage. Can you bring more to the gallery tomorrow? A collector is interested. Hope flickered to life again, fragile but persistent. The collector who responded to my Independence series was Eleanor Bryce, PZ, a prominent figure in New York's art scene, known for discovering emerging photographers. She purchased the entire series of self-portraits for a sum that not only covered my rent, but provided a 2-month financial cushion. More importantly, she introduced me to her network. Your work has emotional intelligence, she told me over lunch at her Upper West Side apartment. Technical skill is common. Authentic perspective is rare. Through Eleanor's connections, I secured a commission documenting a series of historic buildings scheduled for renovation. The property developer wanted to capture their character before modernization. Exactly the type of urban landscape work I excelled at. The contract included not just photography services, but exhibition rights for the finished collection, with my name prominently featured. James Whitaker's book project progressed from concept to production. Working alongside the other selected photographers expanded my professional circle, creating a community of peers who understood both the artistic and practical challenges of our field. One of these colleagues, Patrick, mentioned that Avenue magazine was looking for a contributing photographer for their architecture column. The pay is decent, and it's steady work, he explained. Plus, having a regular publication credit adds legitimacy. I interviewed for the position the following week, portfolio bolstered by my recent projects. The editor appreciated my eye for urban detail and offered me a 6-month contract, 1 assignment per issue, with additional opportunities for special features. By my 3rd month of independence, I'd established a sustainable rhythm. Commercial work paid the bills. Personal projects fed my creative soul. Gallery connections offered paths to artistic recognition. For the first time, my career felt like a coherent entity rather than a series of desperate attempts to prove my worth. I moved from the Bushwick studio to a slightly larger apartment in the same neighborhood. Still modest, but with enough space for a proper work area. The walls quickly filled with prints, not just my own photographs, but work traded with fellow artists, creating a space that reflected my growing professional identity. My phone continued collecting voicemails and texts from my mother, though, with decreasing frequency. I responded occasionally with brief updates, "I'm fine," or "working on a new project," but maintained emotional distance. Jonathan's wedding anniversary party came and went without my attendance. Thanksgiving approached with no plans to return to the family table. The separation hurt especially from my mother, but each week of self-sufficiency strengthened my resolve. This wasn't about rebellion anymore. It was about building a life authentic to my values rather than someone else's expectations. In December, Westside Gallery invited me to participate in their winter showcase, a group exhibition featuring their most promising artists from the past year. Marisa requested not only my urban landscapes, but selections from the Independence series that had caught Eleanor's attention. These self-portraits reveal something essential, she explained during installation. They're vulnerable, without being self-pitying, determined, without being grandiose. They complete the narrative of your other work. I hadn't considered how these different aspects of my photography might connect, but seeing them displayed together revealed the coherent vision underlying my diverse projects. My documentation of overlooked urban spaces and my own struggles shared fundamental qualities: dignity amid difficulty, beauty in honest imperfection. The winter showcase opening attracted significant attendance despite icy December weather. Art critics from several publications circulated among guests. Collectors engaged in serious conversations with Marisa. My section of the gallery remained consistently occupied throughout the evening. I was discussing one of my photographs with an interested couple when I felt a tap on my shoulder. Turning, I found myself face to face with my mother. She looked smaller, somehow less certain than I remembered. Her cashmere coat dusted with snowflakes, her expression a complex mixture of pride and apprehension. "Your work is beautiful," she said simply. "I should have come to see it sooner." For a moment, I couldn't respond, too overwhelmed by her unexpected presence. Then, I managed. "How did you know about tonight?" "Your website," she admitted. "I've been following it. Every new post, every project." We moved to a quiet corner away from the crowd. My mother studied my face with the same careful attention she might give a patient, noting changes invisible to less observant eyes. "You look different," she said. "More yourself." "I feel more myself." She nodded, understanding something fundamental that didn't require further explanation. "Your father doesn't know I'm here," she added, "but I couldn't miss another opportunity to see your work properly displayed." We talked for nearly an hour, the longest, most honest conversation we'd had in years. She asked genuine questions about my photography, my process, my inspirations. I shared the challenges and triumphs of recent months, without minimizing either. "I'm not coming back to the old arrangement," I said firmly as we prepared to part. "I can't go back to that dynamic." "I wouldn't expect you to," she replied, surprising me. "What you've built here, it's real, Yolanda. I see that now." She left with one of my exhibition catalogs tucked under her arm, promising to stay in touch independently of my father. For the first time since childhood, I felt truly seen by a parent, not as a disappointment or a problem to solve, but as an individual with valid choices and genuine talent. That night, Westside Gallery sold 4 of my pieces, including 2 from the Independence series. Marisa pulled me aside as the event concluded. "Art Perspectives wants to interview you for their Emerging Artists feature," she said, referring to a respected online publication. "They're particularly interested in how your personal journey informs your work." Standing in that gallery, surrounded by tangible evidence of my progress, I realized something profound. My father's withdrawal of support intended as punishment had instead catalyzed my authentic success. Without the safety net of family financing and the accompanying burden of disapproval, I'd been forced to prove my commitment not just to others but to myself. Independence, painful as it was to achieve, had given my work an integrity it previously lacked. The photographs I created now weren't attempts to justify my choices. They were expressions of a voice that no longer sought external validation to feel legitimate. As I locked up my new apartment that night, my phone buzzed with a text from my mother. "You sold 4 pieces. So proud of you." The simple message contained no pressure, no qualifications, no subtle redirection toward a more practical path. Just pride, just love, just acceptance. Something had fundamentally shifted, not just in my circumstances, but in how I defined success itself. No longer measured against my father's yardstick or my brother's achievements, success had become personal and intrinsic. The satisfaction of creating work that resonated, the dignity of self-sufficiency. The freedom to pursue my vision without apology. For the first time since striking out on my own, I felt not just financially stable, but emotionally grounded, ready to engage with my family from a position of strength rather than dependence. The question was whether my father was ready to meet me there. 3 months after the Westside Gallery Winter Showcase, on a bright March morning, I received an unexpected email from my father. The subject line was simply, "Conversation, the content equally spare, I'd like to meet. Coffee on Thursday. Your choice of location." My finger hovered over the delete button. Part of me wanted to refuse to protect the hard-won peace I'd established. But curiosity prevailed. What could prompt this outreach after 6 months of silence? I suggested a coffee shop in Chelsea, neutral territory near several galleries I planned to visit that day. His single-word reply, confirmed, was typical of his communication style, efficient, emotionless, leaving no opening for further exchange. Thursday arrived with unseasonable warmth. I dressed carefully, professional, but artistic. My own style rather than what would impress him. The small act of choosing clothes without considering his judgment felt significant. He was already seated when I arrived, looking oddly out of place in his business suit amid the creative professionals who frequented the cafe. Standing when he saw me, he extended his hand formally, as though greeting a business associate rather than his daughter. "You look well," he said after we'd ordered. An observation, not quite a compliment. "I am well," I confirmed, meeting his gaze directly. "Busy with several projects. The magazine column is expanding to twice monthly." He nodded, absorbing this information, with the same analytical expression he used reviewing quarterly reports. "Your mother showed me the exhibition catalog," he said after a pause, "and the feature in art perspectives." I waited, wondering if criticism would follow. Instead, he asked, "The self-portrait series. That was after you left?" "Yes, when things were most difficult financially." He studied the tabletop fingers tracing the wood grain pattern. "You didn't call for help." "That was the point, Dad. To not call for help. To prove I could do this independently." To prove me wrong, he clarified, a hint of his old sharpness returning. "No," I corrected quietly. "To prove myself right." Something shifted in his expression, not quite understanding, but perhaps the beginning of reconsideration. "The property developer project," he said, changing direction. "Mother mentioned it's being featured in Architectural Digest next month." "A small feature, but yes." "And the book with that publisher, Whitaker, it's proceeding. Going to print in August. 10 photographers documenting urban transformation across America." He absorbed these facts, nodding slightly. I realized he was attempting to quantify my success, to measure it against some internal benchmark of validity. Always the businessman, even in personal matters. "You've been resourceful," he finally offered. "Determined," I corrected. "And talented. And extremely hardworking." The silence that followed stretched uncomfortably until he cleared his throat. "I may have been premature in my assessment of your career prospects." From him, this qualified statement represented a monumental concession. I recognized the effort it cost him. A man who built his life around being right, admitting even the possibility of error. "Why now?" I asked. "Why reach out after 6 months?" He looked momentarily disconcerted by the direct question. "Your mother," he began, then paused to recalibrate. "And Jonathan mentioned, your work is gaining recognition." I wanted to assess the situation personally. "This isn't a business merger, Dad. It's my life. Everything is business, Yolanda. Family relationships, career, all investments with returns to consider." I nearly stood to leave then, frustrated by his persistent reduction of human experience to profit and loss. But something in his expression stopped me, an uncertainty I'd never witnessed before. "The gallery owner," he continued. "Marisa. She told your mother you're being considered for a solo exhibition next year." "It's still preliminary," I acknowledged, surprised he'd retained this detail. "But significant," he pressed. "Professional recognition." I nodded, realizing what he was attempting in his emotionally stunted way. Success was the only language he fully comprehended. Now that my photography showed signs of conventional achievement, he could begin reconciling it with his value system. "I'm not returning to the family fold, Dad," I said clearly. "I've built something here, not just a career, but a life that feels authentic to me. I won't compromise that again." "I'm not asking you to," he replied, surprising me. "Your mother misses you. Sunday dinners aren't the same." Sunday dinners were battlegrounds. "They don't have to be." He hesitated, then added, "Perhaps we could establish new parameters for engagement." I almost laughed at the corporate terminology so typical of his approach to emotional situations. But beneath the awkward phrasing, I recognized a genuine, if clumsy, attempt at reconciliation. "New parameters," I repeated, "like mutual respect for my professional choices." Within reason, he qualified automatically, then caught himself. "Yes, respect." We talked for nearly 2 hours, negotiating the tentative terms of a renewed relationship. Not the unconditional embrace I might have fantasized about in younger years, but something potentially more valuable. A recognition between adults with different values but shared history. As we prepared to leave, he reached into his jacket and withdrew an envelope. I was prepared to offer financial assistance, he said, but I gather that would be unwelcome. Completely, I confirmed. Then perhaps this instead. He handed me the envelope. Inside was an invitation to a charity gala benefiting arts education in public schools, his company listed as a primary sponsor. Your photographs, he said stiffly. They might be appropriate for the event program, paid commission of course, through proper channels. I understood what this represented for him. Acknowledgement of my work's professional value, rather than dismissal of my passion as indulgence. Not an apology, but perhaps its practical equivalent. I'll consider it, I said, tucking the invitation away. Outside the cafe, we parted with an awkward hug, brief but genuine. As I watched him walk toward his waiting town car, I felt a complex mixture of emotions lingering and hurt, cautious hope, and most surprisingly compassion for a man whose rigid worldview made it difficult to connect with his own daughter. 1 year after leaving my father's apartment that stormy night, I stood in West Side Gallery surveying the final arrangements for my first solo exhibition. 32 photographs chronicling urban America's overlooked beauty alongside intimate portraits capturing personal struggle and resilience. The culmination of a journey that began with rejection and evolved into self-affirmation. My mother arrived first an hour before the official opening, bringing flowers and unrestrained enthusiasm. Jonathan and Rachel followed, genuine in their congratulations, if still slightly bewildered by the art world. Several minutes before the doors opened to the public, my father appeared, uncomfortable in the gallery setting but undeniably present. He moved methodically through the exhibition, studying each photograph with the careful attention he typically reserved for investment prospectuses. When he reached the centerpiece, a large-format self-portrait titled Independence Day showing me in my first sparse apartment, he paused longer than at any other image. This one, he said when I approached. There's something here I didn't understand before. What's that? The same quality I respect in business. Resilience. He turned to face me directly. You could have compromised, taken an easier path. You didn't. Coming from him, this represented the highest form of acknowledgement, recognition on his own terms, of what my journey meant in a language he comprehended. As the gallery filled with critics, collectors, fellow photographers, and friends, I circulated through the crowd, occasionally catching glimpses of my family. My mother chatting animatedly with Marissa. Jonathan explaining my techniques to an interested guest, information clearly gleaned from the exhibition catalog. My father standing somewhat apart, observing everything with his analytical gaze. We weren't magically transformed into a perfectly supportive family. Years of established patterns don't dissolve with one exhibition or several careful conversations. But we had begun renegotiating our relationships based on mutual respect rather than expectation and dependency. The true victory wasn't proving my father wrong or securing his approval. It was discovering that I no longer needed that approval to validate my choices. The journey from financial dependence to self-sufficiency had given me something more valuable than regular rent payments, the unshakable confidence that comes from building something authentic entirely on your own terms. Sometimes rejection becomes the greatest gift, pushing us toward independence we might otherwise never have discovered. Sometimes the hardest challenges reveal strengths we didn't know we possessed. And sometimes walking away from security opens the door to possibility that comfort would have kept forever closed. If you've ever faced the choice between safe compromise and risky authenticity, I hope my story reminds you that the path of true passion, though difficult, leads to a life of genuine fulfillment. Has someone's lack of faith in you ever become the catalyst for your greatest achievement? Share your experience in the comments below. And if my journey resonated with you, please subscribe and hit that like button. There are many more stories of transformation and resilience to come. Thank you for walking this path with me today. And remember, sometimes the greatest act of self-love is simply believing in your own vision when no one else will.